Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. The biggest challenge in education is how we best serve and cater to the needs of students with diverse intellectual capacity without sacrificing anyone. The current system where age is a determining element to decide academic grouping is a flawed system. So let me illustrate the world on opposition, because the world that opposition wants to maintain is one where millions of students are left behind, unable to deal with the demands of an education system that sees them not as individuals with unique abilities but as numbers on a screen. The education system that they need and deserve is not one merely determined by age, but for that reason, I'm incredibly proud to propose. Now, how will we characterize grouping within this debate? And I think there are three metrics here. Because firstly, students will be grouped into a classroom with other students who have similar scores and maturity. That is to say, if an 8-year-old shows exceptional grades and maturity within their current grade, they can be bumped up into a classroom of 10-year-olds the next year. But for a more likely group, right, which are those who are lagging behind their classmates, they can be moved to a slower class, right? But note that this doesn't mean that we're going to have them stay back a year with younger students. We think that they're still advancing, but just at a slower rate with a few younger individuals who are smarter than average mixed in. And note that this goes per subject, because if you're amazing at physics but then terrible at Chinese, you're going to be grouped into a class that's better at physics but slower at Chinese. Because we think that at the end of every year, rather than simply moving students to the next grade, students will be tested on the higher levels of knowledge to see if they're capable of being placed further, right? Or if they need more time to study the prerequisite material they need for their current grade. But third, we think that either way, it's extremely unlikely for a student to reach the point where they can skip more than 2 years, accompanied with the fact that they also group by maturity, right? Opposition cannot argue that these students won't have had a school life and not enough time to mature. But secondly, I'd like to point out the significance of these motion panels, because millions of students around the globe are left behind because of a negligence and persistence of sticking to one system instead of truly recognizing what children actually have and how they learn differently. Students with different potential deserve the right at a fair chance of life just as much as somebody who is lagging behind. With that out of the way, two arguments I'd like to forward in my speech. Firstly, on why this aligns with the principles of education, but secondly, on why this is better for the actors of education as a whole. So first argument then, so why does this actually align with what education actually is? Because panels, on top of my argument, I'd like to highlight an important premise essential to understanding. Because we think education stands by the fact that being able to spread knowledge to students in the most effective way possible. That is to say, no matter the pace or abilities of a student, education stands to give them a proper knowledge to prepare them for life in a way they can best understand. So two reasons why opposition is actually behind in this premise. Because firstly, note panels, that under opposition's side, you get zero catering to students on both ends of the spectrum. It isn't like every student gets a teacher of their own, because there are limitations, right? That is to say, the problem is teachers can't cater to both who are fast and slow at the same time. They have to pick a point between the two sides. So let me illustrate why this is still the worst for both worlds. And I have two metrics here. Because firstly, if you want to take a look at the perspective of a student who is far ahead of the rest, right? Note that they're not going to be presented with a challenge. Note panels that students learn best when they have a challenge, because that's what actually works their brain. Opposition side is literally a world where you don't give these smart students a challenge, right? And nothing to learn from. But secondly, we think that this also goes from the perspective of those lagging behind students, because the pace at which teachers have to follow is likely out of their reach, right? It's likely that the amount of homework or tests are daunting and a bar that's just unrealistic. Note that for these students who have fallen behind, they can't rely on teachers to slow down for them, because that just becomes a further trade-off for faster classmates who will excel. And note panels that the impact here is twofold, because firstly, all the opposition actually does is limit potential for both smarter and slower students. Note that those who are smarter are held back under the excuse of quote-unquote not being old enough, and those who are slower are left behind with no mechanism to get back up. all you do is contradict the principle of education, which is literally to maximize the potential of a student and give them a fair chance at their future. But so secondly, why is it unlikely that those behind can even catch up in the first place? Because note that if students are already behind in their studies and constantly watch their classmates get high scores with little effort while they themselves have to spend the entire nights to just barely pass, it's likely extremely demotivating. That is to say, that it's unlikely for them to feel that they're actually good enough to catch up in the first place, and that they're going to even put in any effort or significant effort to catch back up. Even if you want to put them in extra classes or seek an after-school lesson, which is most likely what opposition wants to posit, it's likely that they're going to feel like a failure either way when they walk into the class. You don't get any improvement here, you get demotivation. So why then is proposition ahead? Only under our side of the house do you actually get the recognition that children are different, right? We don't force them to conform into norms that they can't keep up with, because we cater to different styles individually. They can't by grouping students by their intelligence and competence instead of ignorantly by their age. We maximize the potential for these students to learn as effectively as possible, directly in line with what we characterize as the principles of education. So second argument then, so why is this actually better for the actors in education as a whole? And first, I'd like to establish, panels, that this isn't that it's not just the inherent nature of grouping students by their age that hurts the students. This also causes individual schools to have a harder time providing for these students. And I have 3 metrics to prove this, right? Because firstly, we think that this goes for teachers, right? Because the context of reliance to one system means that they're forced to think of a class by its age instead of their actual capacity to learn, right? That is to say, under your side, teachers have the expectations higher than what higher than what some students can handle, because the system has normalized directly correlating age with performance, which isn't the case. But secondly, note that students in no way are the same. So you can tell who's smarter than the rest, who are more mature. But the reason why so many students lag behind is because this education system fails to cater for them. They have different learning styles, different interests, and we think that this should play a significant role in education instead of just completely blocking this out for the favor of just one set system, right? Now, and I'd like to note, panels, that the gap between the smartest students and the students who lag behind is extremely significant. We're talking about the difference between students that walk and run. The difference between whether a child can take a test without studying and pass, or a child that studies all night but can't, right? It's extremely significant because OP cannot just pass under the excuse that the difference isn't as significant as we claim. And there's a major impact here, panels, that under opposition side, it's exclusive to students who are unable to keep up. But the teachers also fail to recognize this fact. Your side is the normalization of pushing yourself to the societal expectations because of your age. We think that this harms those behind even more because they feel like they aren't smart enough and they lag behind when it comes to the capacity to learn, right? So for all these reasons, we're so proud to stand behind proposition.